Welcome. I'm Nina Griffin, and this is the Astrology and Magic channel. This is going to be the August 2020 astrology forecast. I have titled it Poking the Dragon, and you'll see in a minute why that is. First, I wanted to say thank you very much to all of my patrons. Your support has been incredible and growing incredibly, so I really appreciate all of you. If you would like to get this forecast earlier than the general public, and also get access to a big array of materials and astrological videos that are not available to the general public, you can become a patron at patreon.com/Nina Griffin. All right, let's get started. So let's talk about this month first as a little bit of an overview. August is going to bring us a series of confrontations in which different kinds of limits are tested and established and reestablished. It's going to be a very fluid month. In many ways, a lot of battles are just going to get started this month. So in no way will this be a new or really set order in any way. Really, it's more a month in which the field of battle will be chosen and the first skirmishes will begin to establish the opponent's strength and to get a sense of what kind of battles may lie ahead. We're going to have Mercury, Venus, and probably most momentously Mars making hard aspects to that trio of planets in Capricorn. That's Jupiter, Saturn, and Pluto, representing resistance, sometimes established order for good, sometimes for evil. It's very difficult to say depending on the situation. But as these planets aspect all those Capricorn planets, you will essentially see a poking of the dragon being all those planets in Capricorn, an attempt to make some changes and to establish some kind of new balance by changing how relationships are handled and how power is redistributed. Now, Mars, of these planets, Mars alone will come back twice more to remake that hard aspect in future months. So, as you will see later, really what we're seeing here with respect to Mars is just that first relationship or just that first sally when it comes to the Capricorn planets. There are going to be rethinking and change opportunities for Mars in the months ahead. What's interesting is that all of this activity, and there's a lot of activity, is really happening primarily in the cardinal signs. So if you have those signs prominent in your natal chart, or if you're looking at a country or an organization that has those signs prominent in its natal chart, it's going to feel very active, very hectic, and very fluid right now. It's not clear who's going to come out on top at all, except that, of course, we know that Saturn is going to be Saturn and very powerful. Really, if you're looking at this from the vantage point of mutable signs or fixed signs, I would almost be tempted to call this period their safe haven period. Completely different experience. It's kind of like we're all on the same planet together, and yet we're having two very different sets of experiences. So there's the poking the dragon experience, and there's the safe haven experience that's happening at the same time. Now, all the mutable and fixed signs, it's kind of like looking at this from like a screen that's split, right? So one half of the screen, you get these like intense battle scenes and all sorts of things going on, lots of action. And then the other half of the screen is like a shot of a peaceful beach somewhere in the Pacific with the palm trees gently swaying back and forth and not a soul in sight. And both of these are true at the same time. So I think some of what we're going to see this month too, and really in the coming few months, is a sense of maybe disbelief, where the safe haven people are kind of like, what are you all worried about? Even as we have battles going on the other side of things. And they're both true and accurate. It's just that not everyone will understand that both of these realities are essentially coexisting in our world today. Let's start talking about the first week of the month, which in many ways will be the most active. It may or may not be the most intense, but it certainly has the most astrological and astronomical events. So right on August 1st, Mercury will oppose Pluto. And this is really part of Mercury's opposition to the Capricorn stellium. This is part of the dragon poking, this time by Mercury. And really, this begins in late July. So obviously, there are 3 planets that Mercury has to aspect, so it's going to take a few days for him to aspect them all. So there's about a week-long period when Mercury is close to making those oppositions. And that week will be the last few days of July and the first few days of August. Now, Mercury, on a global sense, represents business, because he is the planet of merchants. He represents media and journalists. He also represents schools and students, and to some extent, delivery services like the Postal Service, although those are very heavily lunar, actually. So anyway, we can expect challenges coming to these sectors, and they're going to be confronting the power structure. Generally, Mercury will not be at an advantage confronting the power structure at this point. It's kind of like Mercury hits his head against the wall of Saturn, but doesn't really make a lot of progress, right? So it's kind of like, Mercury isn't very strong right now. I think if we had to find a loser and a winner in this particular confrontation, Saturn would definitely come out ahead, as would really that whole stellium of Capricorn planets. Now, August 3rd, Mercury then continues and he opposes Saturn. And also the same day, which is probably the bigger deal in some ways, the full moon at 11 Aquarius will occur. Now, this is not what I would call a hugely eventful full moon, but all the lunations do set the tone for the upcoming 2 weeks, so it's important to kind of get a sense of what the flavor of the upcoming 2 weeks will be. And the ruler of this full moon is Saturn, because he rules Aquarius. So although the full moon itself isn't actually activating any of the cardinal signs, since it's in fixed signs, Saturn being ruler of the full moon obviously brings in some of that tone of seriousness, resistant, and possibly oppressive atmosphere for the next couple of weeks. It's not that it's a terrible full moon, but it doesn't really give leeway for a lot of freedom of expression. It's generally, it wants to keep the lid on things, right? The next 2 weeks are really about establishing and maintaining control. Now, August 4th, the very next day, Mars squares Jupiter. So this is the first of the 3 dragon pokings that Mars is going to experience or do in August. So this is really Mars attempting to bring the fight to the Saturn stellium. Now in August, things go okay-ish for Mars, right? Mars is still direct, he's moving reasonably quickly. He starts the fight because that's what Mars does, and he's applying in this case, so he's really the initiator of any activity. And he's feeling pretty good about it, and about himself and his role in the world. What really happens is it's in the future months that Mars's efforts start to fall apart pretty rapidly as Mars tries and fails to break down Saturn's unassailable resistance. So this is the very beginning of the war when we're all fresh and we're all just raring to go, right? But it doesn't really express what goes on later and the way things change. Also, August 4th, Mercury enters Leo. He really goes through a lot of signs this month. He actually is in 3 signs this month. So Leo is a regal sign, and it is also a feral or wild animal sign. So what we've got here is it likes to make big gestures in Leo, right? Mercury isn't the king. Mercury is the prince, or he's the merchant, right? He's kind of like the vice president or the vizier, if you will. He's not the king. However, he is in the sign of the king. And so suddenly Mercury goes from fighting the power structure to kind of acting like a king. And this isn't necessarily a bad thing. Maybe Mercury realizes that fighting the power is not the way to win here, but acting like the king is. And so suddenly you've got Mercury making all these big gestures, showing the other guy who's boss, right? Lots of media activity involving chest thumping by politicians, by business, by schools. You're going to see a lot of very loud communication about one's own virtues and one's own position at this time. Now, it's also the sense of acting tough, because that's what Leo likes to do. It's, the sun isn't brutal like Mars is, but he is a fighter, right? He is the glorious king. And so Mercury takes on the mantle of kingship, if not the actual power that goes with it. However, interestingly, as Mercury passes through Leo, there are no real showdowns here in terms of aspects, right? It's in a fixed sign, not a lot going on. Mercury is going to be received by the sun, though. So, and when you're received by the sun, it's like you're the sun's honored guest. You know, you're the king's golden boy or girl, and so you get to do what you want. So it's a very different place where Mercury had been just a few days ago fighting the power, and suddenly we're now focused on Mercury sort of, you know, just could do no wrong, right? Now, August 5th, another interesting change occurs. Venus in Gemini conjoins the North Node. And this very often brings news of a sex scandal or something to do with the arts or romance that's a little bit, you know, it's a little bit dirty. And that's part of the nature of the North Node. It has a certain kind of dirtying effect on planets. It expands them, but it often expands them in a way that's not entirely purifying. So what I think we will see, especially because Venus is in Gemini, which is obviously a communication kind of sign, we are going to see gossip or news about some kind of Venusian activity or about a woman. I would expect that to very much be the case. Now, August 7th is when Venus enters Cancer after over 3 months in Gemini. So that's a big event. I mean, in this way, she's almost acting as if she were a kind of a slower, superior planet like Mars, who only changes signs every couple months normally. So Cancer is a lovely placement for Venus. It's very artistic, very emotional, and sensitive. Now, because this is such a big change, I think we will feel it. I think after the first week of August, we will get the sense that, hey, maybe there's an opportunity for reconciliation, right? After her intense retrograde and combustion and everything that was going on, especially in the United States and even worldwide, right, with protests and all of that, suddenly things enter a much more conciliatory and a much more gentle sort of tone. Now, this is also going to be a Venus return for the US because the US has Venus in Cancer in the natal chart. And so often what this meant is that there is at least the opportunity for some measure of racial reconciliation, right? A lot of what we've been talking about with Black Lives Matter and empowering people of color, you know, what do we do now? And it does give us a chance to cool down. Of course, though, later Venus will be poking the dragon too, because she's passing through Cancer, so she's going to be opposing and running into some of those existing power structures, repression, authoritarianism, that kind of thing. So in week 2, we have not quite as many events, but they're going to be important nonetheless. August 8th, Mercury goes combust, which means that he loses visibility. He goes to within about 8 degrees of the sun now. And what that means is that a lot of the power plays that we saw happening in the last couple of weeks really go underground and out of public view. This could happen. Now remember, Mercury also rules politicians, so there could be a lot of political activity going on that is really not going to be for public consumption. You're going to see deal making, you're going to see all sorts of communication go on, but we're only going to see the fruits of that much later as Mercury escapes the sun's beams and once again becomes more visible. Now, August 13th, Mars will square Pluto, so that's the second of the dragon pokings of Mars. And mid-month, I think generally, we'll have a potential for that verbal combustibility, a pressure, people yelling at each other, all in conjunction with power games. So this is, to me, kind of the equivalent of yelling insults at your opponents, but also really using it to maybe distract from something else that's going on, as well as from any kind of sort of power shifting, power plays that this exchange is really meant to establish. Now, August 16th, Sun and Mercury will trine Mars. This is what I would call the chest thumping, and it's going to be a lot of parties will be doing this, a lot of people, a lot of sectors. It's kind of the equivalent of before the actual battle starts, you know, you have the the newsreels of the brave boys marching off to battle in their shining uniforms, and everybody's waving and cheering and feeling patriotic and wonderful, all before the frustrations and the realities and horrors of war really set in. To me, this combination in mid-August is everybody's just feeling all gung-ho and bright and shiny. It's not a negative thing necessarily. It's just not going to necessarily represent the reality of what we'll be coping with this autumn. Now in week 3, Mercury takes on a whole different tone and really takes on a lot of power. I titled this week, Mercury Projects Win the Day, but it's really more than that. It's any kind of mercurial activity on a personal level as well as on a global or national level. So all of those mercurial sectors that I described earlier are going to have a lot of visibility. Well, not a lot of visibility, I take that back. A lot of power and a lot of leeway to do what they want if they can do it in a discreet manner. The visibility comes later. So August 17th, Mercury conjoins the Sun. And of course, whenever Mercury conjoins the Sun, he becomes Cazimi, but he also changes his phase. He can go from Oriental to Occidental or vice versa. So really what's going on now is this is part of a grand plan to inspire and rally the troops, right? Some of those themes of again, having everybody feel bright and shiny about what's coming up. So Mercury goes from Oriental, where he rises before the Sun and is very visible, to Occidental, where he's not going to be leading the parade, right? He's not at the head of the parade. He's in his sort of subordinate secondary role. Still can be a very powerful role, don't get me wrong, but in terms of kind of obviousness and visibility, he just won't have it. Now he will let the Sun take the lead, at least in public. Mercury can still whisper all kinds of advice and direction into the Sun's ear. So now we have the image of the Sun or any kind of authority figure getting these Mercury people or Mercury sectors kind of into the royal tent. And from this point on, Mercury starts on this new cycle. He is changed, he is purified, because that is what a conjunction with the Sun brings, but he's going to act in a more hidden or discreet way. Now remember, Mercury in Leo gets to do what he wants because of the reception by the Sun. He is in the Sun's sign, so he is the Sun's honored guest. Again, he's going to be discreet about it. So suddenly all of these sectors, business, postal service, education, that have been fighting the crown, fighting the power earlier in the month, are suddenly in the catbird seat. Like, they do what they want, right? Also notice that this conjunction is within 5 degrees of the fixed star Regulus. And Regulus is the star of the king. It's one of the royal fixed stars. It is of the nature of Mars and Jupiter, and it brings victory in battle. But you have to have a battle to have a victory. So it's not a happy star. It's just a powerful one, and one that's very much associated with the king or whoever the authority might be in any given situation. So at this point, because this conjunction occurs on Regulus in a royal sign, there is a sense that at this point a shift is occurring in the halls of power, and Mercury is quietly being elevated to a powerful new position. August 18th really cements that. The very next day, we get the new moon at 26 Leo. This is, of course, also close to Regulus, still closely conjunct Mercury, and also trine Mars, right? So it's a rare harmonious alignment that we get to see, and the elevation of these mercurial functions will be with us for the next 2 weeks, really the rest of August. So if you are doing something mercurial in your life, this is probably a great time to really enjoy the power and attention that your mercurial efforts will bring you. There are more good things coming from Mercury, but this is especially important. On a global and national scale, it remains to be seen if this elevation of Mercury is constructive and actually good for people. The very following day, August 19th, Mercury enters Virgo. Virgo is Mercury's exaltation and sign, and actually Regulus now is at 0 Virgo. So Mercury is very powerful August 19th, and it's kind of like he's going from a pillow to a soft place, if you will. right? So he's going from the heart of the king into a better place. Now, he's no longer received by the sun because he's not in Leo anymore, but he is in his own chariot. And this is a Hellenistic term when a planet is in its own dignity, either exaltation or its own sign, where he is not affected by combustion. So again, Mercury dances very close to the king, which is often a dangerous place to be. But he still manages to do what he wants and amass a tremendous amount of influence and power while all behind the scenes. August 22nd, the sun enters Virgo, and so suddenly we get a more public focus on dollars and cents and the actual details of the work that needs to be done. Mercury is very much in the lead here in a way, kind of in a hidden way, right? Again, he's sort of like the gray eminence whispering into the king's ear, letting the sun think he's in charge. But in reality, this is all going to be happening in the realm of money, of banking, and of distribution of funds. So I think that's what we're really going to start to see in late August and as we get into September as well. Now finally, the fourth week, Mars will square Saturn. And this is really, again, part of poking the dragon, but what we'll see here, I think, will tell us so much about what we can expect the next few months as Mars makes these aspects over again. Because this is going to be Mars' first real experience of running into a genuine roadblock or obstacle after all that chest pounding and roaring, right? This is where the ram's head meets the reality of the brick wall, and he now has to rethink his approach. But it's Mars, right? He's not going to rethink it. He's just going to do it again and harder, hoping for a better result, which is not going to happen, but, Mars is Mars. August 25th, Venus will oppose Jupiter. Now, this is Venus, again, the planet of reconciliation and unity, of people living together harmoniously in society, opposing Jupiter and, of course, soon, the rest of the Capricorn planets. So now this is Venus poking the dragon, right? The ideal of harmony runs into obstacles, repression, and intolerance now. So that's what I was saying earlier, right? Is that yes, we come into this with a lot of ideals, but now we have to start thinking about, okay, what are they going to actually mean? And what does it mean when you have these ideals that run up against established power structures? August 29th, Mercury trines Jupiter. So Mercury starts to align with a power structure, or maybe after amassing so much power, he starts to exert some power and leverage as well. This is sort of a mild aspect because it's a trine, but I'm very interested to see any developments that we get both on the political and personal stage. In many ways, I think that this aspect starts to really show us what Mercury is made of and what it can do, given all that it's been up to in the previous few weeks. It really looks to me like the mercurial forces are taking on the mantle of preservation and resistance, which are, of course, all of these wonderful Capricornian keywords. So this is really a process that will reach its full apex in September, but I think it's going to be very interesting to watch, so I look forward to it. August 30th, Venus is very much in the thick of her oppositions. She now opposes Pluto. So we're going to see interesting and strange power games with respect to racial harmony and empowerment. I think we are going to see very rapid changes this month. This is a month that I don't think it's necessarily bad, but I do see so much boundary testing. And as with any boundary testing, it often shifts the balance of power, right? It's, as one of my clients has told me, really so much of what we're seeing here is just looking for that loose brick in the wall. And I think it's a wonderful metaphor on the personal level of what we have to do right now. We really have to look at our obstacles, and even though they look huge and really insuperable, we really need to look very closely and see where are those areas of vulnerability. What can we do? What can we shift? Because once you find that loose brick, that moment and that point of weakness, you suddenly start to be able to knock down that wall. So I am very interested in seeing how that turns out. Obviously, Mars square Saturn is the big story this fall, But I think you can see that all of these other planets have their own role to play in what's going to be quite a magisterial and massive battle for power and for influence this fall. All right, thank you very much for watching. I'm Nina Griffin, and this was the August 2020 Astrology Forecast.